Her brothers took everything, but forgot the workshop their father sealed in her name. What she found inside wasn't just about the past. It was about a future she never knew she had. If you've ever felt like the world has counted you out, or that you've been left with nothing, stick with me for this. This story is for you. And if it resonates, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what happens when you decide to build a new life from the wreckage of the old one. My 18th birthday was a Tuesday in October. The sky outside the lawyer's window was the color of a dirty puddle, and the air inside the office tasted of stale paper and quiet desperation. Mr. Davies, a man whose suit was as gray as his expression, slid a thin folder across the polished expanse of his desk. The sound it made was a soft, final sigh. I didn't reach for it. I just watched his hands retreat, the knuckles pale and tight. He had been my father's lawyer, a man who had bounced me on his knee at firm picnics when I was small, a time that felt like it belonged to another girl in another life. Now he couldn't quite meet my eye. "Ilera," he began, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it all day. "As you know, upon your 18th birthday, the final accounting of your father's estate is presented. The trust he established for you." He trailed off, clearing his throat. He looked at a painting on the wall behind me, a cheap print of a ship on a stormy sea. It felt a little too on the nose. The trust is depleted. Depleted. It was such a gentle word for what had happened. A soft, clinical term for theft. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind of numbness that comes after a long, dull ache. I hadn't expected anything else. For the past 2 years, since I'd been sent to live with my aunt after the state decided she was marginally better than foster care, I had been preparing for this. 2 years of phone calls to my brothers Daniel and Mark that went unanswered. 2 years of my aunt's passive-aggressive comments about the cost of keeping me. 2 years of watching them live in my father's house, drive his cars, and spend his money, all while I was warehoused 100 miles away, waiting for a clock to tick over. "How depleted?" I asked. My voice was steady. It surprised me. Mr. Davies finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary pity I didn't want. "The principal is gone. Your brothers, as the trustees and majority heirs, made a series of investments, high risk. They didn't pan out." He said investments like it was a foul taste in his mouth. We both knew it was code for vacations, new cars, and bad business ventures. "The house was remortgaged to cover the debts. It's now legally theirs, free and clear of the trust's claims. There's nothing left to transfer to you. I'm sorry, Ilera. I truly am." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the things he wasn't saying. That he had tried to warn my father about making his sons the trustees. That he had fought them, filed motions, sent letters. That in the end, their greed was perfectly legal. The system was built to protect property, not people. And I was no longer their property. I was just nothing. A loose end. I nodded slowly, my gaze drifting around his office. Everything was meant to project stability, success. The mahogany desk, the leather-bound books that looked like they had never been opened, the faint scent of expensive cologne. It was all a stage set for a life I would never have access to. A life my brothers had stolen and were probably already bored with. I thought of them in our father's house, the house he built with his own hands, walking on the floors he'd laid, sleeping in rooms he'd painted. The thought didn't even bring rage anymore. It was just a hollow ache, a ghost pain in a limb that had been amputated long ago. "So that's it?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "There's nothing." Mr. Davies frowned, a deep line forming between his brows. He seemed to be wrestling with something. He leaned forward, pulling a much larger, older document from a drawer. It was a thick, folded piece of parchment, brittle at the edges, tied with a faded blue ribbon. A property survey, ancient and sprawling. He unrolled it carefully, weighting the corners with a paperweight and his coffee mug. The map showed the 20 acres that had been my father's land. The main house was clearly marked. The fields. The creek. Legally, his finger tracing a line. From the trust, no, there's nothing. But your father was a meticulous man. He was also a sentimental one. His finger stopped on a small, almost forgotten square at the far edge of the property, bordering the old state forest. It was separate from the main parcel, connected only by a thin, dotted line indicating a right-of-way path. Years ago, when you were 5 or 6, he filed a quitclaim deed. He severed this half-acre from the main estate and deeded it directly to you. It was your birthday present, he said. Your own little kingdom. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered, vaguely, a day with balloons. My father, smelling of sawdust and sunshine, kneeling in the grass and telling me I was a landowner. I had thought it was a game. Because it was deeded to you as a minor and was never listed as an asset of the trust, Mr. Davies continued, a flicker of something, satisfaction, maybe, in his eyes. It was never under your brother's control. Their lawyers, in their haste to liquidate the valuable parts of the estate, completely overlooked it. On this map, it's listed as Outbuilding C. It's worthless, commercially speaking. The appraisal from 10 years ago called it a dilapidated structure. It's probably fallen down by now. But it is, and has been for 12 years, legally yours. He reached into his desk again and pulled out a single key. It wasn't a normal key. It was long, iron, and strangely shaped, with a complex, almost floral-looking bit. It looked medieval. He dropped it on the map, right on top of the little square. The clink was the loudest sound I'd heard all day. The land might be worth a few thousand if you can find a buyer, he said, his professional mask slipping back on. It's your only remaining asset, Ilara. I'd advise you to sell it, take the money, and start over, far away from here. I stared at the key. It was ugly and beautiful all at once. An object from a fairy tale. An impossibility sitting in the middle of a legal nightmare. It wasn't a check for $1 million. It wasn't a house. It was a dilapidated structure on a worthless half-acre. It was, I realized, the only thing my father had managed to give me. The only thing my brothers hadn't been able to touch. And in that moment, it felt more valuable than all the money in the world. I reached out and closed my hand around it. The metal was cold and heavy, a solid, tangible piece of my past. I wasn't going to sell it. I was going to go see my kingdom. The bus groaned its way out of the city, leaving the tall, indifferent buildings behind. I had a single bag with me, containing everything I owned. A few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my father used to read to me, and the small envelope of cash my aunt had pressed into my hand, a gesture that was equal parts pity and relief. Relief that I was finally, officially, no longer her problem. The window was cool against my forehead, the glass vibrating with the rhythm of the road. I watched the neat, ordered suburbs blur into strip malls and then, slowly, into the rolling, unkempt countryside. The sky remained a stubborn, uniform gray. It felt like the world was holding its breath. With every mile that passed, the numbness that had protected me in the lawyer's office began to fray at the edges. Memories started to seep through the cracks. My father, teaching me how to skip stones across the creek, his large, calloused hand gently correcting the angle of my wrist. The smell of the wild roses that grew along the fence line in June. The sound of his hammer, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat, echoing from his workshop on summer afternoons. That workshop, Outbuilding C. He had spent most of his time there. He called it his sanctuary. My brothers hated it. They wanted him to play golf, to manage his investments, to be a father like their friends' fathers. They didn't understand a man who found more joy in a perfectly joined piece of wood than in a stock portfolio. I had loved it. He would let me come in sometimes, but only if I was quiet. I'd sit on a small stool he'd made for me, watching him work. The air was always thick with the scent of freshly cut timber, pine, oak, cherry. Light would stream through the high windows, illuminating the constellations of dust motes dancing in the air. He rarely spoke when he worked. It was a form of meditation for him. His focus was absolute, his movements precise and economical. He wasn't just building furniture, he was coaxing stories out of the wood. That's what he told me once. Every tree has a story, and a craftsman's job is to listen to it. My brothers called it his hobby, a waste of time. After he got sick, they'd argued with him constantly. "Sell the land, Dad. Move to the city. There's no money in making wooden boxes." They never understood that it was never about the money. It was about the making, the creation, the pride in bringing something beautiful and functional into the world with your own two hands. He tried to teach them. He really did. I remember him taking Daniel, the oldest, into the workshop to show him how to use the lathe. Daniel emerged 20 minutes later, bored and covered in sawdust, complaining that it was dirty work. Mark just laughed. The last time I saw my father, he was in the hospital. He was pale, diminished by the illness that was eating him from the inside out. My brothers stood by the door, already talking about what they would do with the house. I sat by his bed, holding his hand. It felt frail, the strength gone from it. He had looked at me, his eyes lucid and filled with a terrible sadness. "Be strong, little bird," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "The nest is breaking. You'll have to fly on your own. I left you a map." I didn't understand then. I thought he was delirious. Now, clutching the old iron key in my pocket, I wondered. The bus pulled into the depot in my old hometown. It was smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling on the storefronts, a sense of quiet decay hanging in the air. I stepped out, and the familiar scent of damp earth and pine hit me. It was the smell of home, or what used to be home. I didn't have enough money for a cab to the old property, which was a few miles out of town, so I started walking. A rusty pickup truck slowed down beside me after about a mile. An old man with a face like a wrinkled apple leaned across the passenger seat. "Need a lift, miss? It's a long walk to the old Miller place." I hesitated. "You know the Miller place?" "Sure do. Used to deliver lumber to your dad. Best damn woodworker in 3 counties. Shame about what happened. Shame about those boys of his, too." He spat a stream of tobacco juice out the window. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just a stranger. It was better that way. "I'm just looking at some property nearby," I said, climbing in. The cab smelled of oil and coffee. "Ain't much out this way but the Miller land and state forest," he said, grinding the gears. "Hope you ain't planning on buying from them boys. They'd sell their own grandmother for a quick buck." I just nodded, looking out the window as the familiar trees and fields rolled by. He was right, they would. And they had. The truck rumbled to a stop at the end of a long gravel driveway. "This is it," the driver said. "Good luck to you." I thanked him and got out, and he drove off, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust and silence. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The driveway was longer than I remembered. At the end of it, I could see the roof of the main house. My house. Their house. I could see Daniel's sleek black sedan parked near the porch. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I had no desire to see them, to confront them. There was nothing to say. They had won. They had the house, the land, the money. All I had was a key in my pocket and a memory of a game my father had played with me 12 years ago. Turning away from the main drive, I found the path. It was barely there, a faint indentation in the earth, almost completely reclaimed by weeds and creeping vines. The right-of-way Mr. Davies had mentioned. It led away from the manicured lawn of the main house and plunged into the darker, wilder woods that bordered the property. As I walked, the air grew cooler, smelling of damp leaves and rich soil. The sound of the distant road faded, replaced by the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth and the lonely call of a crow. It felt like I was crossing a border into another country, a forgotten country. After about a quarter of a mile, I saw it, the workshop. It was larger than I remembered, and it hadn't fallen down. It stood in a small clearing, defiant against the encroaching forest. The wood of its walls was weathered to a silvery gray, like driftwood. The windows were boarded up from the outside, and a massive, ancient oak tree spread its branches over the roof like a guardian. It didn't look dilapidated. It looked dormant, asleep. The door was made of thick, heavy planks, bound with iron straps. In the center was the lock, a complex, dark metal contraption that matched the key in my hand. There was no handle, no knob, just the keyhole. It looked less like the door to a shed and more like the gate to a fortress. I stood before it, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it, the one place they hadn't thought to look. The one thing they hadn't taken. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was trembling slightly as I slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. I put both hands on it and pushed. There was a deep, groaning sound from within the mechanism, a series of clicks and thuds, like the tumblers of a massive safe falling into place. Then, a final, resonant clank. The sound echoed in the silent clearing. The door was unlocked. I put my shoulder against the heavy wood and pushed. It swung inward with a low moan, scraping against the floor inside. A wave of air washed over me, and I froze. It wasn't the smell of rot and mildew I had expected. It was the smell I remembered from my childhood. The clean, sharp scent of aged wood, of linseed oil and metal. And something else, something beneath it all. The faint, lingering essence of my father. I stepped across the threshold, out of the gray afternoon and into the deep, still darkness of the workshop. The door swung shut behind me, and the world outside disappeared. I was home. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom. The only light came from thin cracks in the boarded-up windows, cutting sharp, bright lines through the darkness. The air was cool and utterly still. It was like stepping into a tomb, but a clean one, a respected one. As my vision cleared, I began to make out shapes. Tall, silent forms draped in white canvas cloths. They stood like a congregation of ghosts, waiting patiently in the dark. The floor was swept clean. There were no cobwebs hanging from the rafters. The place hadn't been abandoned. It had been sealed, prepared. I reached out a hesitant hand and touched one of the cloths. It was thick, heavy-duty canvas, not a simple dust sheet. I took a corner and pulled it back. The shape beneath was a workbench, its surface made of a single, massive slab of maple, worn smooth with years of use. On the wall behind it, tools hung in perfect, disciplined rows. Chisels with polished wooden handles, their steel edges gleaming faintly. Hand planes of all sizes, saws with intricate teeth, calipers, and squares. Each tool was in its designated place, cleaned, oiled, and ready. It was an arsenal of creation. I moved through the space, pulling back more of the cloths. One revealed a huge, cast-iron table saw, its surface free of rust. Another, a hulking bandsaw. A third cloth slid to the floor to show a lathe, a long, complex machine for turning wood. This was not a hobbyist's workshop. These were professional, industrial-grade tools, the best of their kind. My brothers had thought this place was a shed full of junk. They had been fools. This was a master craftsman's studio, preserved like a pharaoh's treasure. On the main workbench, in the very center of the room, sat a single object not covered by a cloth. It was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, carved with an intricate pattern of interlocking leaves and vines. It was a work of art in itself. I ran my fingers over the surface. The wood was smooth as silk. There was no lock, but the lid fit so perfectly it was almost seamless. I lifted it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a single, thick manila envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar architectural script. For Ilara. My hands were shaking now. I sat down on the stool I recognized instantly as my own, the one he had made for me all those years ago. The legs were carved to look like willow branches. I placed the box on my lap and carefully lifted out the envelope. The paper was thick and heavy. I broke the seal. Inside were several folded pages, covered in that same neat, controlled handwriting. I unfolded the first page and began to read. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, it means several things. It means I am gone. It means you are 18. And it means you found your way back here, to this place. Of all my children, you were the only one who understood what this room was. Not a place of business, not a hobby, but a place of heart. I am so sorry I had to leave you. My illness came too fast, and there was so much I still wanted to teach you. I am also sorry for what your brothers have likely done. I know them. I love them because a father must love his sons, but I do not trust them. Their hearts are full of holes that they try to fill with money and possessions, but the holes only get bigger. I knew they would not care for you. I knew they would see the estate as their prize. I fought with my lawyers for months to find a way to protect you, but the laws are rigid. They would be your trustees. They would have control. So I did the only thing I could. I gave them what they wanted. Or rather, I let them think they could take it. The house, the stocks, the savings, all of it is just paper. It is just noise. They will burn through it, and it will be gone. And they will be left with the same empty spaces inside them. I could not save them from themselves. But I could, I hope, save you. This workshop and the small piece of land it sits on is yours. It has been yours since you were 6 years old. It is outside their reach. I have sealed it not to hide it, but to preserve it for you. Everything in this room, every tool, every piece of wood, is part of your inheritance. But it is not the most important part. I have not left you money, little bird. Money can be stolen. Money can be lost. I have left you something they can never take, something they would never even understand. I have left you a craft, a purpose, a way to build a life, not just buy one. In here, you will find all the knowledge I have gathered over a lifetime. It is all yours, if you want it. This is your choice, Ilara. You can take the few valuable things you can find, sell them, and walk away. Mr. Davies was right. That is the sensible option. Or you can stay. You can learn. You can pick up where I left off. It will be hard. It will be lonely at first. But I promise you, there is a peace and a strength in this work that money can never buy. The choice is yours, and I will be proud of you no matter what you decide. But if you choose to stay, there is something you must find. A last project. My magnum opus. Your brothers knew I was working on something big, something valuable. They searched the house for it after I was gone. They searched my office, my bank records. They never thought to look here. Look where the starling with the broken wing would have nested. Remember? All my love, always, Dad. The pages fell from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. A sound escaped my throat, a ragged, torn thing that was half sob, half gasp. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart for 2 years, the numbness, the quiet resignation, it all shattered. The grief I had been holding back, the raw, unprocessed pain of losing him, of being abandoned by my brothers, of being utterly alone, came rushing in like a tidal wave. I bent over, wrapping my arms around myself, and I wept. I cried for my father, for the years stolen from us by sickness. I cried for the little girl who sat on a stool watching her hero spin magic from wood. I cried for the lonely teenager who ate her meals in silence in her aunt's sterile kitchen. I cried for the anger I felt toward Daniel and Mark, an anger that was suddenly sharp and hot, because now I understood the full depth of their betrayal. They hadn't just taken money. They had tried to erase him. They had tried to erase me. They had trampled on his memory, on his love, on the very essence of who he was, all for things that glittered. But as the tears subsided, something else began to rise in their place. A fierce, burning love. He hadn't left me. He had never left me. In his final months, consumed by illness and worried for my future, he hadn't been thinking of himself. He had been planning, scheming in his own quiet way. He had built me an ark. He had seen the flood coming, and he had built me this place, stocked it with everything I would need, and left a map only I could read. The letter wasn't an apology. It was a gift. It was a key, more important than the iron one in my pocket. It unlocked the past and showed me that I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. I stayed there for a long time, on that little stool, in the quiet, scented darkness, the letter clutched in my hand. The workshop no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive. His presence was in the tools hanging on the wall, in the scent of the wood, in the very stillness of the air. This room was the last pure piece of him that was left in the world, and he had given it to me. The choice he had laid out was no choice at all. Walk away? How could I walk away? This was the only home I had left. I'm going to pause here for a second. Because this moment, right here, sitting in the dark with my father's letter, was the turning point of my entire life. It was the moment I stopped being a victim of my circumstances and started to become the architect of my own future. Have you ever had a moment like that? A message from the past, a sudden realization, a discovery that just unlocked everything and set you on a new path. If this is hitting you, if you know what that feels like, let me know in the comments below. I read them all, and I want to hear your stories. And if you're finding something of value here, please consider subscribing. We're building a community for people who understand what it's like to have to rebuild from the ground up. Now let's get back to the workshop. My father's last words in the letter echoed in my head. Look where the starling with the broken wing would have nested, remember? The memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. I must have been 7, maybe 8. We'd found a young starling in the grass near the workshop, its wing bent at an unnatural angle. My father, with his impossibly gentle hands, had taken it inside. He'd fashioned a tiny splint from a popsicle stick and some medical tape. For a week, the bird lived in a box in the corner of the shop. I named him Pip. My father said we couldn't keep him, that he belonged to the sky. But while he healed, he would sometimes flutter out of his box. He was never able to fly high. He'd make his way up to the rafters, finding a specific spot, a little nook where 2 beams joined, and he'd tuck himself in there, watching my father work. A nest. My eyes scanned the high, dark ceiling. The rafters were thick, hand-hewn beams of oak, dark with age. I dragged a heavy wooden stepladder from a corner, its legs scraping loudly on the concrete floor. It was heavy, but a new strength flowed through my limbs, an energy born of purpose. I positioned the ladder directly under the spot I remembered, a joint high above the main workbench. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What would I find? What was this magnum opus he had hidden so carefully? I climbed, the old wood of the ladder groaning under my weight. The air was warmer up here, thick with the smell of dust and ancient timber. I reached the top, balancing precariously, and ran my hand along the rough surface of the beam. I felt it almost immediately. The faint outline of a square, a section of wood that wasn't quite flush with the rest. A hidden panel. There was no handle, no latch. I pressed on one edge, and it gave slightly. I pushed harder, and the panel swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity cut deep into the massive beam. Inside, protected from dust and light, were 2 objects. The first was a long portfolio, bound in dark green leather, tied shut with a cord. The second was a set of tightly rolled blueprints, secured with a leather strap. I reached in, my fingers trembling with anticipation, and carefully drew them out. They were heavy, substantial. I tucked them under my arm and climbed back down the ladder, my movements slow and deliberate, as if I were carrying something sacred. I laid them on the workbench, right where the carved box had been. For a moment, I just stared at them. This was it. The core of the secret. The real inheritance. The choice he had given me felt monumental. I could take these documents, walk back to Mr. Davies's office, and find an appraiser. I could sell whatever this was to the highest bidder, take the money, and disappear. It was the sensible path. The path of survival. But as I looked around the workshop, at the tools waiting silently on the wall, at the stool he had built for me, at the faint lines of light cutting through the darkness, I knew I couldn't do it. Selling this would be the real betrayal. It would be no different from what my brothers had done. They had sold his memory for cash. I wouldn't. His legacy wasn't something to be sold. It was something to be lived. He hadn't left me a treasure to be liquidated. He had left me a challenge. A vocation. A chance to become a person my father would be proud of. My choice was clear. I would stay. I would learn. I would finish what he started. With a deep breath, I untied the leather strap on the blueprints and gently unrolled them across the workbench. The drawings were breathtaking. They were done by hand, in ink, with a precision and artistry that was almost inhuman. They detailed the construction of a cabinet, but calling it a cabinet was like calling a cathedral a building. It was a story cabinet, according to the title block. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a dozen drawers of varying sizes, several hidden compartments, and 2 large doors. And every single surface was covered in the most intricate marquetry I had ever seen. Marquetry is the art of creating pictures using thin veneers of different colored woods. These weren't just patterns, they were scenes. A panoramic history. One panel depicted a young couple getting married under a blossoming tree. Another showed them building a house, board by board. There were scenes of children being born, of family gatherings, of hardships and triumphs. The final panel showed the couple, now old and gray, sitting on a porch, watching the sunset. It was the story of a life, a family, told in wood. The detail was incredible. The grain of the wood used to create the texture of clothing, the subtle shift in color to show the fading light of evening. It was a masterpiece. I opened the leather portfolio. Inside were the commission documents. The client was a name I recognized, Alistair Finch, a reclusive billionaire and one of the world's foremost art collectors. The contract was dated 2 years ago. The price listed for the completed piece made my head spin. It was a number with 6 zeros. More than the house, the stocks, and the savings combined, several times over. This cabinet wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a priceless work of art. My brothers had been searching for a treasure, and they had been standing on top of it the whole time, completely oblivious. My elation quickly turned to dread as I read the fine print. The contract was ironclad. The commission was personal to my father, listed by name as the sole artisan. The contract would be rendered null and void if the piece was not completed by him. A wave of despair washed over me. It was an impossible task. But then I saw it, a specific clause, number 17B. My father, with his quiet foresight, must have argued for its inclusion. It stated that in the event of the artisan's incapacitation or death, the work could be completed by a single, named apprentice, whose qualifications would be subject to the client's approval. And there, typed into the blank space, was my name, Ilara Miller. He had been planning this for years. He had been setting me up not as his heir, but as his successor. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. I was 18 years old. I had never used a chisel in my life. How could I possibly complete a masterpiece that would have been the pinnacle of his own career? The portfolio contained more than just the contract. They were sketches, notes on wood selection, and detailed, step-by-step instructions for the marquetry process. And then I found the final part of the puzzle. Tucked into a sleeve at the back of the portfolio was a key to a large, flat storage unit under one of the workbenches. I found the unit and unlocked it. Inside, carefully stored in climate-controlled crates, was the wood. Not just any wood, rare, exotic veneers from all over the world. Pearwood for skin tones, ebony for shadows, shimmering satinwood for sunlight, burled walnut for the texture of old bark. He had already gathered every single piece I would need. He had left me a blueprint, the materials, and a lifetime of knowledge. Because as I dug deeper into the workshop, I found the last greatest gift. His journals, dozens of them, stacked on a shelf, filled with his handwriting. They were a complete record of his life as a craftsman, his techniques, his failures, his discoveries, his philosophy of wood, work, and life. This was the real inheritance. Not the cabinet, not the money. It was this, a map to becoming him. The days that followed blurred into one another. I didn't leave the workshop. I slept on a cot I found folded in a corner, and I lived off the non-perishable food my aunt had packed for me. My world shrank to the size of that room, and I didn't mind. It was the safest, most real place I had ever been. I started with the journals. I read them chronologically, devouring my father's life, his thoughts, his voice speaking to me from every page. He wrote about the first wobbly table he built as a boy. He wrote about the frustration of a joint that wouldn't fit, and the sublime joy when it finally slid into place. He wrote about the personality of different woods, the stubbornness of oak, the forgiveness of pine, the regal beauty of cherry. He didn't just write about woodworking. He wrote about a way of being, about patience, about respecting your materials, about finding the beauty in small, quiet things, about how the act of making something with your hands could heal the parts of you that were broken. The world will always try to rush you, he wrote in one entry. It will tell you to be faster, cheaper, more efficient. Ignore it. Good work takes time. A real life takes time. The wood knows how long it needs. You just have to listen. As I read, I began to understand the true nature of his gift. My brothers saw the world in terms of assets to be acquired and liquidated. They took the house, a physical structure, but they had no concept of home. They took the money, a numerical value, but they had no concept of worth. My father had given me the opposite. He had given me a place that was more than a structure, it was a sanctuary. He had given me a project that was more than its monetary value, it was a legacy. He had seen the hollowness in their lives, the frantic, greedy pursuit of things that could never fill them up, and he had shielded me from it. He had ensured that my inheritance wasn't something I could cash in, but something I had to grow into. After a week of reading, I put down the journals and picked up a tool, a simple block plane. I remembered him showing me how to use it once, how to hold it, how to adjust the blade until it was just a hair's breadth deep. I found a scrap piece of pine and ran the plane over its surface. The first pass was clumsy, digging in too deep and tearing the grain. I remembered his words from a journal. Don't fight the wood, dance with it. I adjusted my stance, eased my grip, and tried again. This time, a perfect, paper-thin shaving curled up from the blade, translucent and fragrant. I did it again, and again. The repetitive motion was calming, meditative. I wasn't just planing wood. I was connecting with him. His knowledge, his experience, was flowing from the pages of his journals, through my hands, and into the work. I knew I couldn't hide in the workshop forever. I had to take the next step. With a deep sense of trepidation, I used my cheap cell phone to call Mr. Davies. I told him everything, about the letter, the workshop, the blueprints, the commission. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "My God," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "That clever, stubborn man. He actually did it. He built you a lifeboat." He was shocked, but also impressed. He told me he would handle the legal side. He would contact Alistair Finch's estate, present the contract, and make the case for me to be allowed to complete the work. Don't get your hopes up, Ilara, he warned. These people operate on a different level. They're not sentimental. But your father's reputation carries a lot of weight, and the story is a powerful one. A few days later, he called back. They want to talk to you, he said. A video call, the estate manager. He's a tough customer, but he's intrigued. He wants you to prove you have what it takes. He explained the terms. They would give me a probationary period, 3 months. I had to complete one of the smaller, but still complex, drawer fronts from the cabinet. If it met their standards, which meant, if it met my father's standards, they would consider honoring the contract. If I failed, the deal was off forever. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on my shoulders. But it was a good weight. It was the weight of a challenge, of a chance. It was the weight of hope. That night, for the first time, I turned on the main lights in the workshop. A series of old fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, humming gently and flooding the room with a bright, clean light. The ghosts in their canvas shrouds were gone. In their place stood potential, a future. I walked over to the stack of rare wood he had prepared. I found the materials for the designated drawer front, a piece of dark walnut for the frame, and tiny, paper-thin veneers of holly, sycamore, and rosewood for the inlay scene. The scene was of a small bird, a starling, learning to fly. I unrolled the specific blueprint for that drawer. I studied my father's notes, his sketches of the bird's wing, the precise angles of the feathers. I laid the veneers out on the workbench. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I thought of my brothers, in their big, empty house, surrounded by things they had bought but not earned. They had what they thought they wanted, but I had something better. I had work to do. I picked up the first tool, a fine-bladed fret saw my father had customized himself. The handle was worn smooth from the pressure of his hand. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of sawdust and possibility. I felt his presence beside me, not as a ghost, but as the knowledge in my head and the strength in my hands. I was not alone. I made the first cut. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It was the beginning of my story, told in wood. So that's where it all began. Not with an ending in a lawyer's office, but with a beginning in a dusty workshop. The journey from that first cut to the finished cabinet was long and difficult, full of moments of doubt and frustration, but also moments of pure, transcendent joy. But that's a story for another time. What that first discovery taught me is that the things people can take from you are never the things that truly matter. Your real inheritance isn't in a bank account or a property deed. It's the strength, the resilience, the love, and the skills that are written into your heart. They can take the house, but they can't take your home. Have you ever had to find your own workshop? A place, a passion, or a purpose that nobody else understood, but that saved you and allowed you to build a new life for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe our stories are the most valuable things we own, the things no one can ever take away. Thank you for being here with me and for listening. If this meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe so we can continue sharing these stories together. You are not alone in this. We're a community of builders here,